The day my leg finally healed, Helen's long-lost crush came back to town. At the welcome back dinner, this guy looked all charming and confident. He had the nerve to call me unworthy of Helen while I was sitting there in a wheelchair. I thought maybe Helen would defend me, but nah, she only had eyes for her old flame. Later, I got a picture of them kissing. When confronted with the evidence, Helen showed zero guilt. Instead, she was just worried I'd hurt the guy she loved. Peter, do whatever you want to me, but leave him out of it. Helen, you seem to have forgotten why I got hurt in the first place. But now, I can stand up, and it's time for you to face the consequences of your betrayal. The day my leg healed, I cooked a big meal, waiting for Helen to come home. The food got cold, but all I got was a picture of her kissing another guy. In the photo, she had one hand, the one with our engagement ring, tightly gripping his neck. The other hand was around his waist, with veins popping out as if she was trying to merge with him. Her eyes were full of possession, something I hadn't seen in a long time. As I zoomed in on the guy's face, memories I thought I'd buried came back. It was Charles. My heart sank. Charles, the guy Helen was infatuated with. The year I met Charles was the first year I was in a wheelchair. Back then, Helen's eyes were full of gentle compassion and leftover love. After all, my injury was because of her. But her love and guilt couldn't compete with the monotony and confinement of everyday life. Soon, she started talking about a guy named Charles. Peter, did you know? This dude named Charles won the race. Is he nuts? He told the professor my report didn't deserve an A. Helen claimed to hate arrogant people, so she hated Charles. But if she hated him, why did her eyes always follow him? I heard Charles joined some protest in another country, getting himself in trouble. She made fun of him but couldn't hide her concern. She dropped me off at the apartment, then hurried out, probably pulling some strings to bail Charles out. All because he's a fellow countryman? Nah, that's not Helen. Later, I checked Charles out myself. He always had this sunny, fearless smile, a stark contrast to depressed me in my wheelchair. But that grin was eerily familiar, just like how I used to be. In our 2 years of drama, I'm not sure who fell first. Then Charles's family business went under and he dropped out. Helen went crazy looking for him for a while, then just gave up and settled. I heard from friends that Charles was back, this time with his brand. The crush Helen once left shining now blazes even brighter. No wonder Helen is drawn in again. I get it. Helen admires strength. Back in high school, we attended the same elite school. Everyone there was rich or came from powerful families. My competitive and leadership streak made me student council president. Helen and her crew were the class rebels. We were like oil and water. One day, she cornered me, demanding I erase some bad records of her crew. I grabbed the ringleader, slammed him against the wall, hard enough to draw blood. Want medical bills covered? Come get me later. Now scram. The room went silent. No one dared approach again because, well, my family owned the place. Helen, matching my family's status, wasn't mad. Instead, her eyes held curiosity and interest. From then on, she was always there, tailing me. I didn't give her much thought until she followed me to the same college, and our fates were sealed when my accident happened because of her. I turned from a bright spark to a shadow of myself, consumed by rehab and pain. I lost my edge, becoming soft, like a tame cat, catering to her every need, my happiness rooted in her approval. But Helen hated that. 5 years of this dull routine, and she was bound to grow bored. Especially someone like Helen, who yearned for excitement. 5 years of cold metal and wheels trapped us both. I became background noise. My dad called, furious, demanding I come home. He threw a financial paper at my feet. This is the woman you sacrificed for. I picked it up. A picture of Helen and Charles kissing took up a quarter of the page. My mom, shaking with anger, said, Peter, is this the type of person you chose? Meanwhile, my sister, Mandy, looked up from her game, mocking me. Peter, not only are your legs useless, but you're judge of character too. What a disgrace. Watch your mouth. That's your older brother. My mom snapped at her. My legs had always been the family's taboo topic. She gave a cold snort, looking impatient, and turned to go upstairs. I watched Mandy walk away, my eyes flashing with a rare sharpness that quickly turned into disappointment. My mom's face showed concern. With this little episode, neither of them seemed ready to get mad at me again. My dad looked grim, speaking in a low tone. Now our family's stuck between a rock and a hard place. If we let you keep throwing yourself at her, it shames us all. If you break up, it might hurt our business. We've invested so much in you, and you can't even keep one woman? I felt a chill in my heart, like I was dropped into an ice cave. I clenched my left hand into a fist so tight that my nails dug into my skin. Eyes down, I admitted, I know I'm not good enough, but Helen liked me for my abilities back then. Now if I just cling to her like some weakling, she's gonna hate it. My dad's reply cut deep. When we didn't let you join the company, it was because of your leg. Do you want the world to laugh at us? To my dad, only his image and gains mattered. Without a job, even they looked down on me. What do you mean, did Helen bully you? My mom exclaimed. I feigned a look of silent grievance. I knew my mom had a soft heart. She slammed the table. Unbelievable. Daring to bully our son. She held my hand, her grip warm and dry. I've decided to give you half of my shares. They were meant for you and your sister anyway. She's still young, but at 25 you need something to your name. My eyes flickered with emotion. My heart warmed. 10% shares were enough for now. Mom! I hugged her. But her next words made my heart grow cold again. Learn to manage the company so you can help your sister later. I felt deflated. But I nodded and said sweetly, okay, I'll help take care of the company with her. When Helen came back, I already had the photo printed out and placed on the table. Her frown deepened at the sight of me. The living room was dimly lit by a single lamp. Her face was half bathed in warm light and half in shadow. So what do you want? She asked, her tone cold and unapologetic. Even though I was her official boyfriend, holding proof of her infidelity. When I looked at Helen, her eyes were calm and slightly impatient. She seemed sure I wouldn't leave her, annoyed by my supposed tantrum. Years ago, Helen had only love and surrender in her eyes. I swallowed my anger, trying for a gentle tone. Helen, doing this and getting caught, seen by both families, it'll just hurt Charles. I thought I was being pretty understanding. But she blew up the instant I mentioned Charles. She strode over, looking down at me with a gaze full of distrust and threat. Peter, if you ever hurt Charles again, I won't spare you. It was the first time Helen had ever been this angry at me. Her voice fierce, but for Charles, not me. Again? What did she mean by again? I looked at her, bewildered. She glared down at me. Peter, it was you, wasn't it, who made Charles drop out of school? Her hand clamped around my throat, anger sparking in her eyes. Peter, after all this time, how could you be this cruel? If Charles hadn't been smart enough to escape, he'd be ruined because of you. Helen was truly angry. The pain and fear of suffocation gripped me. Helen, I never did anything like that. Am I really that kind of person to you? Meeting my teary eyes, her gaze faltered a bit, but her annoyance only grew. She let go, watching coldly as I gasped for air. A hate almost impossible to suppress surged inside me. Peter, you got hurt for my sake. Do what you want with me. Just don't harm anyone else and don't let me down. With that, she walked out. The next day, she didn't come back. I knew where she went. I looked at the invitation on my phone from an unknown number. It was for Charles's welcome home party, on a yacht owned by Helen. At the party, Charles was surrounded by people, his face glowing with cheerful confidence. Time had matured him, giving him a hint of sophisticated charm. Helen stood by his side, watching him with an undeniable deep affection. People praised them as the perfect couple. Charles seemed even more pleased, and Helen looked at him gently, not denying anything. Ironically, her engagement ring was still on her finger. When Charles saw me, the cheer drained from his face, replaced with a thin smile. Peter, didn't think you'd really show up. All eyes shifted to me, and upon seeing the wheelchair, surprise filled the room. Helen's expression hardened, the deep affection replaced with something complicated. Facing his mocking, taunting look, I calmly responded, "You invited me. Of course I'd come." He sneered, whispering, "You think you can take Helen back? She's not leaving with you." His gaze slid over my legs, full of contempt. His face flashed with anger, not expecting me to be so blunt. "Peter, if you hadn't used those dirty tricks to push me out, you'd be just a third wheel, right?" Charles was losing it. His face twisted as he poured a glass of red wine over my legs. The red liquid flowed down, like streaming blood, another bitter memory of the accident. Yet Helen stood by, indifferent to it all, unbothered by the scene. Charles kept ranting, "You don't deserve Helen. You trapped her with guilt while being a wicked cripple." I didn't wait for him to finish. I grabbed the glass off the dining table and threw it. He screamed. Not even a drop of the red wine splashed on him because Helen stepped in front of him. She looked at me with anger in her eyes. "Peter, how many more people will you hurt with these legs?" I stubbornly stared back at her. "I didn't do that. Why won't you believe me?" Helen wasn't the rebellious, slightly awkward girl I remembered anymore. She once swore she'd protect me for life, but here she was, on the other side. Everyone around started pointing fingers at me, mocking and taunting. These people were clever. They didn't care about right or wrong, only Helen. Helen didn't seem to hear the insults thrown at me. She stood in front of Charles as if I were some kind of threat. Charles's brothers threatened to have security throw me out. I stood there, surrounded and accused by everyone. "Come back with me, Helen." My voice was shaky, like a sad character on TV begging a woman to come home. Charles's lazy and arrogant voice echoed, "Helen, if you leave today, I'm going back to France tomorrow and never coming back." His words hung in the air with a hint of spoiled menace. Helen made her choice, holding Charles's hand tight. Whispers spread around us. "Peter's love is just pathetic." I lowered my head, as if defeated. But really, I was trying not to laugh out loud. "Love?" I scoffed in my mind. Over the years, everyone thought I was hopelessly dependent on Helen, unable to be without her. But how could I love someone who couldn't even stay loyal to love? Maybe, back in those wild, youthful days, I felt something for the girl who stood by me. But now it was just hate I felt toward Helen. If not for her, how would my legs be injured? How did I, Peter, end up like this? Back then, she had a fight with a girl at school. The girl, under influence and angry, drove right at Helen but hit me instead. That day, I ended up disabled. My father, a businessman through and through, only showed real affection for his daughter. No matter how much I achieved, he never really saw me. And my mother, who loved me, still put my sister first. Mandy was their ideal heir. I studied piano and painting. Mandy studied finance and management. They said I'd be the company's image, Mandy's best assistant. But I refused to lose just because of my gender. I wanted everything with my own abilities. Yet my plans paused the day of my accident. I was sidelined, disabled, and dismissed by the company. The only card left was Helen's love and guilt. I never expected her change would be so rapid. So I hung around Helen over the years. 1, to network and understand market trends. 2, to constantly remind her of my injured legs, keeping her guilt alive. I became what Helen hated, ensuring no emotional ties bound us. Her love disgusted me. Meanwhile, I worked on therapy, aiming to stand and reclaim what's mine. And now, Helen, let's see how much your guilt is worth. Days went by in meetings and paperwork for shares and contracts. I'd followed the company's business closely, so transitioning wasn't hard. The company spanned cosmetics, education, and real estate, with cosmetics at the core. I planned a new product line with medical ties. As a new VP, I faced gossip and resistance, especially with my big project. But I was all in. This was my comeback. It was Helen's message that reminded me of her. "Why aren't you home?" A week had passed since the welcome dinner. Her attention now obvious. I replied with mild irritation, "Coming back now." Helen sat on the sofa when I walked in, cigarette in hand, not fully smoked. I kept my recovery quiet, staying in the wheelchair. Her glance at it showed instant frustration. "Where have you been?" I asked. "Parents wanted me home for a bit." Pausing from extinguishing her cigarette, I knew she disliked my parents' pressuring marriage, so I smoothly changed the subject. Helen, let's hit the Maldives for New Year's. Her frown deepened, like I had suggested something impossible. Peter, she paused, eyes weighing her decision. My heart beat faster. Let's cancel the engagement. Finally. Why? I forced a few tears, my acting almost slipping with the joy of success. We don't have love anymore, do we? I'll compensate you, she said. Generous as expected, 3 properties and a check. Our 3 years over. I signed the contract, suppressing a grin. Helen seemed lost, lingering in her gaze, almost hesitant. Did Helen love me? Probably deeply, once. But her love had room for more than one. She wanted both men. But life's never that easy. Without a backward glance, I turned to leave, only for her to grab my wrist. My smirk caught in her eyes. Anger started to brew in her face. Peter, she gritted out, don't you have anything to say? I played dumb. Helen, you wanted the breakup. I agreed. Isn't that considerate? Helen probably wasn't ready for my sudden change. Eyes furrowed. After all, I'd pretended to be devoted for 5 years. If you face trouble, you can still come to me. Thanks, Helen. I wish you and your lover happiness. My cheeky smile seemed to sting her, or my sarcasm hit a nerve. Her glare grew sharp, with a hint of panic. My tone turned cold. Helen, don't forget I was once someone you couldn't have. Just hope you don't regret it. Her hand loosened, then clenched into a fist, veins slightly popping. In the end, all that was left was a confused face and empty, dazed eyes. Thanks to Helen's money, my product line moved forward smoothly. I also bought some shares on the side to boost my voice in the company. Later, I heard Helen arrange some partnerships for Charles's brand, but Charles's small company still made little noise in the domestic market. Instead, Charles was eager to become Helen's husband, posting secretive photos of them living together on social media. That kind of short-sightedness was exactly what Helen hated. He built his brand on being an independent and successful guy, and his fans were not happy with this behavior. His career started going downhill, and Helen never gave him an official title. In fact, Helen's personal social media still showed the background photo of us holding hands with engagement rings. Charles lashed out at me online, but I clapped back and then blocked him. Then came Helen's call. I didn't pick up and blocked her, too, until she called me using her assistant's phone. Peter, don't be so childish, she said, sounding a bit frustrated. That's when I finally let her out of the blacklist. Helen was right. I hadn't made those 2 regret anything yet, so it wasn't time to celebrate just yet. 2 months later, I invited Helen and Charles to my new product launch. To my surprise, she quickly replied, accepted the invite. She was never this quick to reply when we lived together. Her reasons were always busy, in a meeting, or didn't see it. Now that we're apart, she seems to have more free time. In the waiting room, I looked at my reflection in the mirror, staring at my healthy legs. Hopefully, today's me won't disappoint you. Helen, I'll be back as the Peter you once loved. Sure enough, the moment I walked on stage, I saw the shock in Helen's eyes. Her fingers, with their prominent knuckles, gripped the chair's armrest, almost making her stand up. Sitting next to her, Charles looked awful. Standing under the spotlight, I gave everyone a confident smile, smoothly introducing my new product. I hope to develop it into a sub-brand. Thanks for coming. Applause erupted from the audience. I glanced around, catching Helen's complex and intense gaze. She leaned back, looking up at me, eyes fixed, unblinking. Charles's face turned dark with jealousy. I gave a proud, confident smile, caught by countless cameras below. Peter, we heard you were paralyzed. Is that true? An interviewer asked. Yes, I answered openly. In college, I was in a car accident, paralyzed my legs, and only after 5 years of rehab did I stand here again. I believe I have the strength to overcome anything. The audience gasped, then applause broke out even louder. Right after the event, Helen stopped me backstage. Why didn't you tell me? Your legs healed? Her eyes fixated on mine, dark and intense, barely concealing her anger, ignoring Charles's visibly uncomfortable expression beside her. For a moment, I felt a hint of satisfaction. I raised an eyebrow, smiling. I wanted to tell you back then, but you were busy flirting with your little lover. Her throat moved. Are you mad at me? Yes. Her expression softened, maybe thinking my anger still meant I cared. I didn't give her a chance to respond, turned, and walked away. Let her stew. She's still useful. The launch was a success, trending on social media. In this age of viral short videos, my speech was clipped into a minute-long video, spreading like wildfire. Charming, confident, and hardworking. A rich kid persona is quick to blow up. I had all the right traits. Not going viral would be unusual. This was the result I wanted. Not only did I want to boost the product line, but also make myself the face of the brand. Dad and the old shareholders' conservative views are outdated in this fast-paced world. Marketing and hype are necessary. The product line quickly became a hot topic, sales outshining the existing products by tens of times. Stocks hit the daily limit. The next day, still smiling at the soaring numbers, I got a call from my mom. Peter, come home fast, there's trouble. Once home, I saw Mandy kneeling in front of my parents, stubborn and defiant. Beside her stood a nervous boy. Dad held a short whip, trembling with anger. You rejected the engagement for him? Even slapped him? Mandy defiantly held her head high. He insulted Gary. Dad, I don't like Tim. How can you decide my marriage? I'm only 18. Dad, livid, whipped her. Because you're the eldest. This marriage was set when you were little. Do you know how influential Tim's family is? You're selling your daughter for that? I love Gary. If Tim touches me again, I'll hit him again. She grabbed the boy and left. Passing me, she bumped my shoulder, looking with disdain. Dad clutched his heart, collapsing back. Mom rushed to support him, worried. Calm down, your heart. Dad saw me at the door. Go, go. Bring her back, apologize. I nodded and headed to the garage, driving out in my Porsche. I caught up with Mandy using GPS. She was on a black motorcycle, helmet on. The boy sat behind her, arms around her waist. I matched her speed and rolled down my window. Mandy, stop. Come back with me. She ignored me, speeding up instead. When stopped by a red light, she slammed the bike in frustration. Dad sent you? She scoffed. He couldn't even keep me. So who do you think you are? Peter? You're just the cat I've had following me around since I was a kid. I furrowed my brows. When Dad cuts your card, don't come begging to me. She snorted. Don't threaten me, Peter. This house will be mine sooner or later. No matter what, I'm their only daughter. The light turned green, and she sped off. The boy in the back seat glanced at me, catching my eye. I didn't chase after her. Dad was so furious he ended up in the hospital. I turned the car around and headed to the hospital. Mom said the other side called, wanting to cut all cooperation. The latest batch of products was seized for alleged failure to meet inspection standards, aiming to cripple our supply chain. Tim's family is in politics. They won't let their son be bullied and will naturally retaliate. Meanwhile, the head of PR sent a message. Public opinion had flipped. Charles posted accusing me of interfering in their relationship, calling me a homewrecker. I opened the trending photos. They were from the day of the conference when I talked with Helen. Photos, chat logs, stories, all spreading like wildfire. They're deliberately guiding the public's perception. Anything fake can become real under the right brainwashing. The inspirational image I built for myself shattered into pieces. Netizens feeling deceived swarmed to my social media, leaving hateful comments. This is disgusting. I bought products from his company yesterday after that speech. Returning them all. Dad, lying in the hospital, had even higher blood pressure. You and your sister did such a good job. Are you trying to ruin the company? I looked at the angry messages on my phone with a calm expression. Dad, just rest. The doctor said you need to calm down. You all are going to be the death of me. I looked at him calmly, despite his distress. Dad, I have a way to change our situation. His eyes widened. What do you mean? I can steer the company through this crisis, but you're getting old. It's time to hand over power. I leaned over, tightly gripping his hand resting by the bed, looking down at him. He's no longer that person I once looked up to and feared. Dad's eyes flared with anger. So this is why you've been waiting. Huh? You want company shares. Mom rushed over, pulling at me. Peter, how can you think of shares at a time like this? Don't upset your dad. Mom, why did you always think I was not good enough? What's so great about Mandy? I'm your child too, so why am I not capable? With tears in my eyes, I declared to my mother. My parents always responded to softness, not toughness. I turned back to Dad. Dad, you're in the hospital. Other than me, who else can take control? That useless daughter of yours? Do you want to see the company you built go down in flames? Mom finally calmed down. Her eyes filled with complicated emotions as she looked at me. After a long silence, she spoke up. I always thought a man without ambition couldn't achieve great things. But Mom, I'm your son. Ambition and the desire for power were ingrained in me from the day I was born. I got what I wanted, 30% of the company shares, becoming the largest shareholder. That afternoon, I got a congratulatory text from Helen. I blocked her immediately. She seemed to get a rebellious kick from it, calling me from one number after another. Unable to stand the bombardment, I finally answered. The moment I picked up, I heard a drunken voice. Peter, do you hate me that much now? Why don't you love me anymore? Helen, do you think I could ever forgive a woman who cheated? Perhaps my tone was too cold and harsh. Silence on the other end. Then came a slightly hurt voice. Peter, you weren't like this before. If you mean before these past 5 years, naturally. But even further back. Helen, you seem to forget I've always been like this. I sent the call recording to Charles. Online, the abuse and harassment continued. The company's crisis worsened. I remained quiet, waiting for the public sentiment to peak. Sure enough, the next day Charles went on a rant on social media, igniting a huge reaction. On the trending square, some people were chastising, others were just watching, and even rival brands joined in to kick us when we were down. I chose noon to release a statement of clarification. I posted evidence of Helen's infidelity and Charles chasing after her on social platforms, including footage from a yacht trip. After 5 years, I had infiltrated every part of Helen's life, and installing some monitoring on her yacht wasn't hard. Inconsiderate woman defends arrogant lover. Teams up to bully her wheelchair-bound fiancé. Every word was explosive. I hired marketing accounts and bots to spread it like wildfire. Soon, the narrative shifted dramatically. Charles's previously active social accounts fell silent. He messaged me from an unknown account. Peter, are you crazy? Do you know you're destroying Helen with this? You love her, don't you? Apologize and say it's fake, or she'll never forgive you. Charles was confident, thinking my deep love for Helen meant I wouldn't ruin her future. But he miscalculated. What do their futures mean to me? I didn't reply. The insults kept pouring in through the chat. I took screenshots and posted them online. Might as well let those hungry for more drama indulge. The post went up, and Charles instantly quieted down. Quickly, netizens discovered Helen's social account background, a photo of us holding hands. Everyone waited for her response. Charles was on internet, guilt-tripping, wanting to bind himself to Helen. If Helen wanted to save herself from public scrutiny, she'd have to save Charles too. But Helen didn't say a word. She just silently removed from the trending topics, one by one until it was all gone. L Group and Charles's brand studio were in the hot seat, the focal point of public outrage. The taunts and curses I once faced seemed destined to be visited upon them. I chuckled at the spectacle, watching as company and Peter's search metrics skyrocketed. That afternoon, Helen and Charles came with a lawyer to the company. Helen led, with Charles trailing, trying to cling to her arm but was coldly rebuffed. Under everyone's gaze, an awkward look flashed across Charles's face. In the CEO's office, Helen crossed her hands, her right hand ring gleaming. She glared intensely at my empty fingers. She gritted her teeth. Where's your ring? Charles and the lawyer were taken aback. This wasn't the opener they expected. Lost it, I said casually. Her eyes turned red-rimmed. We designed this together when we first got together. We even went to France to have a renowned master craft it. Says engagement ring, but it was worn for 7 years. Helen went silent, while Charles looked anxious. Peter, hurry up and issue a clarification statement. I shot him a look like he was clueless. Why should I? One cheats, the other plays the lover. I'm just letting everyone know the truth. What needs clarifying? He was so mad he stomped his foot. Do you want to destroy Helen? Do you realize the impact this kind of scandal has on Helen and the L Group? Helen lifted her head, eyes full of fatigue and dimness, waiting for my answer. I chuckled slightly. What does that have to do with me? Helen's eyes lost their light completely. The truth is, this scandal can't shake L Group's position in the pharmaceutical industry. It's just some gossip for people to talk about. She came today just to get some answers. But Charles's little workshop is different. A little boat on the sea moves with the waves and can be overturned by them too. Helen, you see how poisonous this man is. He doesn't love you. He's after your L Group money, trying to exploit you. Shut up. Helen's low and raspy voice carried a hint of anger, hitting everyone's ears like a thunderclap. Charles shuddered with fear and went quiet. I wasn't scared in the least, staying calm. Peter, delete those posts, let Charles go. Consider it an apology for getting people to bully Charles back then. I scoffed. Charles's face changed, eyes evasive. Who knows how convincingly Charles forged the evidence to fool people for so long. Helen squinted slightly. What do you mean? Even if Charles confronted me face to face, I'm not afraid. I never did it, simple as that. Turning the conversation around, I smiled at Charles. But you really should hate me, Charles. I didn't get people to humiliate you, but when your dad was transferring company assets, I reported him. I found the evidence and gave it to the police. Charles looked at me, disbelief on his face. It was you? You bastard. You ruined me. The next second, he tried to grab me by the collar but was held back by Helen. Enough, Charles. Were you playing me? Helen was truly angry. No matter how much Charles cried out in pain, her grip on his shoulder didn't relax a bit. The veins on her hand stood out as if she were going to crush his shoulder blade. Didn't Helen see Charles imitating me on purpose and deliberately getting close to her? And did she really think I didn't notice? I had security drag Charles out. He still tried to struggle until he saw me raise my phone at him, and then he stayed still. Before leaving, he begged Helen. Helen, save me. This is my life's work. This is my only reliance, Helen. Don't you like me? You can't abandon me. But Helen never gave him so much as a glance. Once her interest faded, Helen was cold and ruthless at heart. My phone rang. It was the private detective I hired to follow Mandy. All right, got it, I said, hanging up the phone. I showed both of them out. Helen didn't seem eager to leave, locking her deep eyes on me. Where are you going? I sighed, a bit impatient, home to deal with some personal stuff. I'll go with you, she said quickly and firmly, as if afraid I'd refuse. I shot her a puzzled glance. She explained, your family, having me there might help. Helen's eyes showed tenderness and concern, also asserting her value. Yeah, Helen knows everything. She knows how I get treated by my family with my disability. She also knows how my greedy mom and arrogant sister make things hard for me. But all these years, she dodged going home with me, even cheated and wanted to break off the engagement, leaving me to face the storms alone. She wasn't willing to step up when I needed her. Now that I don't, she offers herself as a shield for me to use. How ridiculous. Still, I took Helen along. She might come in handy for what's next. After being out for days, Mandy finally came home. The first thing she did was slap me, with a look of utter arrogance on her face. You drove Gary away, didn't you? Helen practically leapt in front of me, pushing Mandy to the ground. Her eyes were red, voice hoarse and furious. Who do you think you are, laying a hand on Peter? I smirked. Helen now was just like back in high school, destined to be my enforcer. Mandy was shocked for a moment before turning red with anger. She was pampered since birth, always addressed as Miss. No one had ever hit her like that. She tried to break free from Helen's hold but couldn't. And who are you? Peter's little lapdog? Peter, make her let go, or I'll tell Mom and you'll be in big trouble. I furrowed my brows. Who does she think she is? Does she really think the world revolves around her and everyone else is beneath her? Though it's not entirely her fault, considering that I've molded her into this. Since Mandy was born, I knew our parents' priorities had shifted completely. No matter how hard I tried or how excellent I became, they never noticed. So I painstakingly made Mandy into a brat. When she fought at school, I paid and apologized for her. When she skipped school and raced cars, I smoothed things over with her teachers. When she hit up bars and gambled, I followed her around, paying her tabs and settling her debts. She started dating early and went a little crazy for love. I let it slide and even helped her hide it from our parents. Mandy grew up to be a spoiled and inept brat. She naturally treated me like her servant, ordering me around. By the time our parents noticed and tried to correct her, it was too late. But now, I'm going to break the arrogance I nurtured in her. I found a baseball bat in the storage room. I put it against her leg. Didn't you call me a cripple, Mandy? What are you doing? She stuttered. Do you believe I could break your leg too? You're crazy, Peter. Helen looked at her coldly, pressed harder on her hand. I decided Mandy's stubbornness could serve a greater purpose. The doorbell rang. Tim arrived, wearing a purple suit and leather shoes, followed by a group of bodyguards. I handed the bat to him. Just don't break anything. Let Tim vent. As I was about to leave, Mandy's trembling voice stopped me. At last, she spoke decently. Where's Gary? Her voice shook with fear, but she asked for Gary, not for mercy. I chuckled bitterly. My sister. I couldn't decide if I should praise her for being so deeply in love or scold her for being foolish. I decided to crush her last hope. Mandy, do you really think Gary actually loves you? When I closed the door, I saw the despair in her eyes. I cleaned up her messes so many times that I knew exactly her type. So I paid someone to act the part. Gary was practically a custom actor crafted to her preferences. My sister didn't disappoint. She fell for it immediately. Gary left with the money I gave him to study abroad. Mandy got beaten up, but Tim spared her bones. Later, I sent her off to the States. Mandy had long hated studying, and her English was a mess. After being a pampered princess for so long, it was time she faced some hardship. After that day, Helen kept popping up around me, downstairs at my office, at parties for wealthy businessmen. She clung to me like a ghost. Whether I ignored her or mocked her, she remained as unwavering as ever. Peter, if you want to control the company completely, I can be your sharpest tool, right? I'm the best marriage option for you, Helen insisted. But she still didn't see the big picture. Just as foolish as Charles. I already had power, but the L Group's control was still in her parents' hands. Soon, Helen disappeared from my life. That's because the country started cracking down on corruption in the pharmaceutical industry. Every company related to medicine was on edge, self-auditing, and trying to make connections. No company was entirely clean. It was just a matter of how well hidden their dirt was. After 5 years around Helen, did she think I wouldn't have backup plans? I'm not a great person, but in business warfare, legal means can be the most lethal. Soon, an investigation probed the L Group thoroughly. The L Group held a significant position in the industry, but not enough to cause major upheaval. The government needed a scapegoat, and I fed them evidence from the shadows. L Group was the first takedown in the pharmaceutical anti-corruption storm. The L Group was severely weakened, with several big names facing prison, including Helen, who had quickly risen as a key company figure. When I saw her again on the financial news, she'd become gaunt and weary, undergoing investigation. That fierce demeanor she once showed me was gone. Meanwhile, I solidified my position as head of the company, lauded as an entrepreneur in financial magazines. To outsiders, it seemed I'd had a tough 5 years, but only I knew that those years of lying low were crucial to my rebirth. Our paths were different, but I reached the ending I wanted, despite the struggles.